Hello, dear viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Well, the not so glad tidings came through early today that Sir Sean Connery has died. Sir Sean died in his sleep this morning. It was announced by his son. Sir Sean Connery was a world-renowned actor, and a few people had harsh word to say about him. Um, so he died at the age of 90. He was born in Edinburgh, United Kingdom, into a working class family. He grew up a Catholic, and there was still a bit of anti Catholic animus around at that time. So he left school in his mid teens, as was typical back then, just after the Second World War. He did various odd jobs, being a coal man, a milkman, things like that. And then he was conscripted into the Royal Navy because from 1939 up until right up to 1963, there was national service in the United Kingdom as in compulsory military service, with a few exemptions for certain categories of men. Um, and once he left that, he got into bodybuilding. He won the title of Mr. Universe in the 1950s. So he was always a very fine physical specimen and looked after his health. He went bald in his mid 20s, but you might not know that because a lot of his films he's made to wear a toupee, including Bond. Um, anyway, he had bit parts in some films. Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which came out in the mid 50s, which is this really hackneyed version of 19th century Ireland about leprechauns and so on. I can't remember the chap it stars, one of Ireland's best known actors at the time, but he wasn't widely appreciated outside Ireland. He plays that king of the leprechauns. Anyway, he married twice, I believe, had a number of children, Sean Connery. And what's really made his name was Bond. He was the first Bond, Dr. No, in 1962, if memory serves. And people didn't realise what a rip roaring success it was going to be when they dramatised those novels by his fellow North Briton Ian Fleming. And they're often set in exotic locations, particularly the Caribbean, where Ian Fleming spent a lot of time. He had a house there in Jamaica called Golden Eye, and that's where the locale in these films will shift a lot. There was that epoch-making scene where Ursula Andress walks out of the sea in that very striking white bikini with a big knife strapped to her thigh, and eventually she's got big shells and things like that. Well, it's probably not the big shells that people were really looking at. Yeah, that's him. And then I know it's become quite trite, the Bond narrative, the various plot devices, and the being poisoned and the being put to die, but then the villain doesn't stay to verify that Bond's actually been killed. All these hair's breadth escapes and so on. But it was groundbreaking for the 60s, and he was a matinee idol. He was macho. He was credible. He was unemotional. Had those rugged good looks. He played Bond several times right up into the end of the 70s when he ceded to Roger Moore. Obviously, George Lazenby did that one on Her Majesty's Secret Service, so everybody pans. But actually, if you look at the box office figures adjusted for inflation, on Her Majesty's Secret Service is about middling in terms of a Bond film. So anyway, he'd had enough of the Bond series. And the trouble is, Connery felt, in a way, he was cursed by it because he was really just hounded by the media. The reptiles wouldn't leave him alone. He couldn't show his face anywhere in public with a paparazzo pointing a lens in his face. He left the United Kingdom for tax reasons. It was more advantageous for him to spend time in Switzerland, in I think it's the Bahamas as well. But he was a man of exceptional liberality, digging into his own pocket to donate funds for what he thought were worthy causes. For instance, the World Educational Fund for Scotland. I don't think you had to be Caledonian to be a beneficiary thereof, but I think you had to be studying in Caledonia. There was a contentious aspect to his behaviour. Bond as a character obviously is a notorious womanizer, and you'll see when he portrays Bond, he often grabs women, snogs them, seeming against their will. And this era of Me Too, that would be not viewed as simply playful or slightly naughty, sometimes pushing women quite hard. And there was a notorious interview that he gave to Playboy in the 1970s, in which he said that wife beating was acceptable. Anyway, so he played many other roles through the 70s, through the 80s. He had a bit part in A Bridge Too Far. That is that 1972 film about the Arnhem attack, the Battle of Arnhem in 1944. And then into the 80s, I can't remember what he was doing in the 80s actually. Well, there's The Untouchables, in which he supposedly plays an Irish American, but he's a Scots accent. I know Connery is an Irish surname, so he's partly Irish, a quarter or less. But and no one's been to Ireland or Great Britain would think that that was an Irish accent he was speaking in. But they could have just made him a Scots American, doesn't matter. But anyway, I suppose they worked on the basis that the average American going to the pictures would not be able to differentiate between the twain. And then he in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves '91, he has a cameo right at the end, coming in as Richard the Lionheart. Always played goodies, notably. Maybe that's why he remains such a public hero. Medicine Man in the early '90s, I thought was a fairly dreadful film. But he appeared in that one, and I can't remember what his other billings were, but he was seen as an all-round stand-up gentleman of Hollywood. So he, some people thought he was a poor actor. Was he limited in his abilities? Was he typecast too early? Perhaps not able to give your full expression to the full range of his talents. Certainly, he wasn't musical. He aged fairly well. Or what is it called? The Rock. He starred in that one about Alcatraz, some sort of breakout from Alcatraz, or some group of people trying to take over Alcatraz to keep hostages there. Anyway, he was an affable sort, unpretentious. He was someone who vociferated on behalf of the Scottish National Party, the policy of breaking up the United Kingdom, though he did not live to see that happen. In fact, he lived to see all his fondest hopes crash into dust when that plan was defeated by the Scottish people. So he was granted a knighthood quite a few years ago. When initially it was held back, he felt he was somehow being penalised for his separatism. And so that's him. He has died, a very accomplished chap who had a really splendid life. What else can I say about Sean Connery? I certainly appreciated watching his Bond work. Well, I felt he was quite credible, stoic, unexpressive type, a masculine archetype for many. And I met other people who really are in bewildered awe of Sean Connery and his attainments and what he did for entertaining the masses. That's enough about Sean Connery. Toodaloo.